So, first of all, let's review the web application security architecture, or web security architecture as a whole, right? What we have there. First of all, we have those two different, slightly different layers of architecture. Yeah, so we have actual web applications, web software that runs the logic, that executes the application logic, organizes the logical interfaces with the users and the other web applications or other sorts of applications even, okay? And there is the platform, yeah, that basically creates the basis for web software operation. So logically, web platform is located at the lower levels of web application infrastructure. And as we know from previous sections, this results in web applications, web software explicitly trusting the web platform. Okay, so everything that's below normally uses, or if compromised, abuses the trust of higher levels of infrastructure. That's what we know, and please bear that in mind through this section. So what we have on the software level, on the application level, that's of course several different types of web application architecture tiers, the so-called tiers that can be distributed between the physical or virtual hosts, or can be contained within one operating system or cluster, right? However, they carry out different activities. Okay, so there is this backend thing that's responsible for storing and retrieving the data and implementing some application logic, right? So everything that requires heavy calculations is normally placed at the backend tier. Okay, there is front end that is responsible for interacting with the user or other processes, other applications, taking out the requests from them and giving them the responses. So that's what its main purpose is, and based upon what's the nature of its peers in these operations, it can be of different kind or sort, right? It can be either just a application programmable API, yeah, or it can be a full operational graphical user interface. So that is the main criteria of how heavy the client is. Okay, so based on the front end specifics, it may require different kinds of clients in order to interpret with it. Okay, so if the front end is fully functional and it presents the full GUI to the user, then there is no need to create a heavy client that will implement all the presentation layer of the application. Okay, so it's just possible to load static or dynamically generated pages to the browser, and that's all. If, on the other hand, the front end is just a data access level application that just takes a request from you and gives you out the response, then we will most probably need, in order to operate in a human manner with this application, we will require some heavier client. We will require some representation application that will basically get our input somehow into the form, collected into the form fields, or I don't know, provide us the means of audio input or graphical input, and then encode it somehow, yeah, create a request, throw it to the front end, yeah, wait for the front end to process it, to validate it, to give instructions to backend if required, get the result from the backend, craft the response, and then throw it back to us, to our heavy client, and then it just takes this data packet that it just received from the front end of the web application and somehow turns it into the human comprehensible response on the screen. Okay, so this is how it works. The backend can be and normally is further divided into two tiers, one of which is called middleware. Okay, so it's like not an end at all, but some middleware that connects the front end and the back end, or multiple front ends and multiple back ends. Okay, and back end in this situation is treated as something more or less static. So it doesn't do anything logical, but it just is busy all the time by this task of keeping the data in order, right? So this can be a database management system that doesn't store any procedures in it, right? And it's not running anything except for some service tasks against the data, just vacuuming the database and keeping everything clean in order. Okay, so yeah, that's what different application tiers are. Okay, then we have different types of interaction with the outside world. Okay, first and the most convenient to us as human users is, of course, the graphical user interface. So when we are talking about a web software that is presenting something to the real humans, we normally call it web application. Yeah, so it normally has some human interface, like a web form or a graphic interface of some sort. So it's possible to work with it with our hands, yeah, so manually. And it has some other controls and forms. Of course, it has buttons or some other things, right? So it can generate dynamic content based on our actions within the application on the fly, right, without interacting with the front end of the server side. Yeah, so everything is done on the client side in this case, or it can be on the constant continuous session. Yeah, so like on the call all the time with the server side, and communicate with it and get instructions from it of how to better treat our actions and input data and so on. So this can be really different. It can be continuous, it can be discrete, it can be event based. Yeah, so nothing happens until the user clicks or presses or moves the mouse or does other things. Yeah, it can be asynchronous, so it can like run multiple threads that are interacting with the user, with the screen, with different components of client and server side software. Yeah, so this can be really complex. But for the user, normally it should at least look like the really neat and nice graphical user interface that is pleasant to work with. And there is the other way to connect with the outside world for the web application. It's application programming interface. Yeah, so API. It's more of a machine interface. So in this case, the front end is normally called a web service, and it assumes that the situation assumes that some other application will be connecting the API. So it's rare when a user just comes to the API with a web browser and starts to type API calls into the location bar of the browser and then get the JSON or XML responses and parses that output with the RISE, right? So that's just what we as ethical hackers do. But normally people do not do that. They use some kind of front end, some client side application that can be a web app, right? Something that is loaded into the browser. some heavy client, yeah, some really thick client. Or that can be a mobile application, for example, yeah, so mobile app, of course, connects to web services too, or some other form of this presentation layer software. What's the specifics of this API? So it further can be split into two large domains. So in the enterprise world, it is really common, but it's somehow somewhat legacy already. Yeah, this approach of using SOAP, this simple object access protocol, that basically that's quite complicated, but you can imagine that is as the means of like getting an XML document from the client side and then routing it through different web services in order to first identify which one is responsible for processing this specific API call, this XML document, and then getting the results back. Okay, so this is more of enterprise application bus or data bus kind of thing that's applicable for really large multinational companies or large system banks or something like that. In the publicly accessible web applications, it's more common now to to see something more RESTful, right? So what it is, it's RESTful API is basically it's more convenient for a developer, most probably, yeah, especially if the developer is not very familiar with XML processing, yeah. And it looks like, you can imagine that there is a host name and there is a relatively long URL that contains different directory names or different words separated by slashes going one after another. So they go in a row and everything is in the location bar of the browser, for example, yeah. And when you call that, when you press enter into the in the location bar, there is no directory like that, yeah. So there is no this fifth or sixth level of directory structure on the web server, yeah. Basically there is no directory structure there, but when the web server gets that long URL, yeah, with words separated by slashes, it processes that as if it was like the tree structure pointing to the specific action that we have to perform on the server side, yeah. So for example, it's a domain name like example.com, then goes slash and then goes v1, for example, which just identifies the version number of the API to use, okay, and then goes slash and then goes select and then goes slash and then goes name and then goes slash and then goes equals and then goes slash and then goes string, yeah, some string that just is just user provided, right? Like Vlad, okay. So select slash name slash equals slash Vlad. So when web service gets that, it just processes that, and based on the internal logic of that web application, yeah, that web service application, it puts the different components of that virtual path into different variables, or just selects different actions, different logical components from its functionality based on what are the words in this RESTful API call, okay. So it most probably will just select something from the database based on the operation that is equals, yeah, and the string that is provided by the user in the end of this call. Also, there can be just a method, yeah, API method specification in the URL, yeah, but beyond the URL there will be a request body that will be sent over to this service that will contain the parameters of that API call. So let's say we just will see v1/select, okay, and then in the request body there will be a JSON structure that is looking like a basic structure in any structural programming language, but in JSON stands for first letters stand for JavaScript, so it's coming from the JavaScript world, but it will be like a structure that contains different variable names associated with their values. Okay, so we will have there, I don't know, in the brackets we will have the pairs like action colon no, action is select basically, yeah, so we already have provided the method, but there will be like criteria colon equals and string colon Vlad. Okay, so this will be like a simple example of RESTful API provided by a JSON packet that specifies the variables of the method called on the web service. So I hope that doesn't blow up your mind yet. So there is a lot of information to consume until the end of this section. So let's go proceed.